the dot. Yeah, now
There it is, yes.
yeah.
Okay, and once again, let's all mute except Noreen. And we're recording. Hi guys, welcome to the User's Guide to the Soul. And we're just getting onto Facebook here, so welcome if you're joining us on Facebook. Welcome to User's Guide for the Soul. We're so glad to have you here, whether you're here in our Zoom class or on Facebook, which is starting to stream now. So we've been discussing for the past several chapters the kabbalistic approach to getting joy at its maximum state, both getting things out of the way that might get in the way of joy, and now in these chapters, 33 and 34, how to just increase joy through tools of meditation and through different postures that Judaism provides. Yeah, looks like we are here on Facebook. So hi, if you're joining us on Facebook, feel free to put comments here, and we will bring them up in class. So please join us. So the beginning of this chapter talked about how the meditation we learned in chapter 33, which very quickly is to meditate on the concept that the entire world, all of time, all of space, all spiritual worlds are completely nullified compared to the Ein Sof, compared to God. And so makes no difference if my eyes are open or shut, makes no difference what my experience is. Everything is just completely not there. And the truth of what life is it is a direct encounter with the Ein Sof. The world is not here. And that if you can internalize that and have that be your lens through which, hey, thanks for the shout out, through which you are internalizing, through which you are interpreting, the world and your experiences, you'll always be happy, because who doesn't want to be sitting down with a one-on-one with God, directly with God's essence, right? It's beyond any of the things we can elevate to spiritually. It's really a mindset that brings us to the heart of divinity. And he goes through the chapter and really overlays many concepts of how to amp up the joy of that realization and carry that through the day and through life. Now in chapter 34, he brings us down to earth, and he says, so now speaking to Small Ash's reality, while the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, they were on this level where that was their reality 24/7, their whole lives. Every part of their body, every part of their mind recognized that the world didn't exist, such that they were just chariots for divine energy and divine will. Well, we got some people joining our class, pardon me. That at my level, Cantor Small Ash, I have to sit down and really push myself to get even a glimmer of that. I'm nowhere near the level of a chariot. And also Moshe was at that level, and each one of us as a soul, we learned, was at that level at Mount Sinai for a moment. But the fact that we really couldn't handle it was illustrated by the reality that our souls were blown out of our bodies. We really couldn't survive that level of truth, so to speak. And so instead, chapter 34 goes to say God created a mishkan, a dwelling place, where the ark would sit with the broken tablets of the Ten Commandments, and there God's presence was not just real, but was apparent. So we know God's everywhere. We know that the world doesn't exist compared to God, but it's not apparent. I live my life as if I'm real. But when we went to the temple or to the sanctuary, the tinted sanctuary, the tabernacle, there we got back to that state, a little bit of what we were at Sinai, where it was apparent to us. We recognized, we acknowledged that there wasn't a world, it was all just God. And we took that back with us in our lives. And we had that, but then that, of course, was destroyed. And now we don't even have that link to the infinite. We don't have that server. We don't have that, what do you call the internet in your house? Where the internet comes in. There's a word for that, but I'm tired and I can't remember it. But we don't have a good link to
Wi-Fi?
have that, the Wi-Fi, yeah. We don't have that Wi-Fi link to be in touch with that reality. And so what's the default for us? The free pass to get back to that state where truly we create a home for God's presence in our lives. That's just plain learning Torah. Because even though I might look at it and think it's just a book or it's just a scroll, kabbalistically, that is chokhmah of Atzilut, or even chokhmah of Ein Sof, if you like. And so it's a spherotic flow that's so high above the creation of the reality I'm in. When I learn it, in my consciousness, I create a home for God's unity. And you can get a sense of making that apparent in your mind and your heart. But the main thing is it's happening, it's there. And so when we open up this book and we learn that, we're actually creating that same mishkan, that same dwelling place for God in our minds and hopefully in our hearts, because we like learning, it inspires us, we have emotions. So as much as we can get our emotions to flow as well, now our mind and heart become a mishkan for God. And that's our free pass, that when we're sitting down to learn, we're not just learning because we like to be educated. We're not just learning because that's what Jews do. We're not just learning because it's a tradition. We're learning to have time with God, to connect with God, and to make a home for God in our minds, in our hearts, and by extension, in our whole lives. So if you're one of these rare people in Jewish history that are functioning at the level of a chariot, then you don't need this free pass because you're doing that all the time. But if you're like the vast majority of every Jewish person, that's our ticket to the same experience they had, and we just have to take advantage of it and get that consciousness flowing. Does that make sense? So this is the color by numbers version of functioning the same way the chariots through our history function. So we're starting at page 457 in chapter 34 in this edition of Lessons in Tanya. Let's start with the second paragraph. Right? Elazot ese lo mishkan umachon l'shivto hu ha'esek b'talmud Torah kfi hapnai sheli b'kiviyut yitim bayom uvalayla. Go ahead, Noreen.
This being so, I will make him a sanctuary and an abode by studying Torah at fixed times by day and by night to the extent of my free time.
And that's a relative thing, right? So we all know about the lifestyle where some traditional Jews will learn Torah, from morning till night, and that'll be their full-time occupation. I don't think there's anyone here that falls into that category. Most of us have, families to care for, jobs to manage, responsibilities in the world. That's seen as being divine providence. So it's not like I'm any less than someone who's learning Torah full time. I have this much free time. If I use it properly, now I'm functioning at the same level as someone who maybe has all free time to learn Torah and is doing it 18 hours a day or 12 hours a day. They have more knowledge. I get that. But in terms of what their soul is meant to elevate, I'm functioning at the same level as them as long as I'm using my time efficiently and appropriately, right? And here we see it actually gets into halakha. There's halakha there's Jewish law about, depending on how much time you have, what your responsibilities are to learn Torah from this perspective. Kedat ha-nitna l'chol echad ve'echad b'hilchot Talmud Torah.
Is stipulated by the law governing each individual's situation, set forth in the laws of Torah study.
Right? So you remember when we were talking about the definition of a tzaddik, a righteous person, a rasha, a self-centered person, and a beinoni, an intermediate person that we're learning how to be, right? We said that if you waste even one moment that you could be learning Torah and you don't learn Torah, now you're in the category of a rasha. So these laws, they're pretty demanding. However, if you have responsibilities and you can't learn during that time, there is a minimum that actually puts you on the same footing as any great scholar that's learning all day. And that is,
as our sages say, even one chapter in the morning and one at night suffice for one who can manage no more. For him to be regarded as engaging in Torah study day and night, therefore, by fulfilling his minimal quota, I, too, will become an abode for godliness.
Right, so throughout history, we know of times when really Jewish people were poor and had to work many long hours and could only take Shabbat off. And the reality was you'd get up very early, you'd say a few Psalms, you'd quickly pray, and then you had to rush off to do what you were doing, farming potatoes or gathering sticks or whatever it might be, or being a wagon driver. So for these people, in the traditional davening, in the traditional morning prayers, there are sections of each piece of the Torah. There's Mishnah, there's Gemara, and you recite them as part of the morning prayer, and that actually covers you. So for those people throughout history, as long as they did just the basic davening that many Jews were familiar with, they would fall under this category. They did a chapter in the morning and a chapter in the evening as they finish, and they have no other time. And that at their level, that is fully creating an abode for God. And as we'll see, there's ways of even elevating the rest of the day up. Just because I can't learn all day doesn't mean that that is just neutral time or wasted time. The Alter Rebbe is going to bring the rest of the day into this whole dynamic of creating a home for the infinite right in my consciousness, right in my life. And so what'll be the result? Because I know that now I am functioning just like the patriarchs. I'm making a home for God. And I'm right there with God before whom the whole world doesn't exist.
Thereby his heart shall rejoice. He shall be glad and offer joyous thanks for his fortune.
So that's, honestly, I'll tell you, there's many things in the world that make a person happy. And a vast majority of them, as we know, if we've lived life, are fleeting. So I'll be happy for an hour a day or a week or a year. But in terms of the spiral of higher level joy, everything fades. There's no car that you're going to be thrilled with for your whole life. There's no house you're going to be thrilled with for your whole life. There's no food you're going to be thrilled with for your whole life. And no matter how delicious or wonderful or expensive or amazing something is, you get used to it, and then the thrill is gone. You're left wondering where joy comes from. But this is something that actually just spirals upwards and upwards, and there's not an end. If you're meditating on the reality of creating a home for the infinite here in your life, and that's your soul's purpose, that's something that Jews throughout history have drawn joy from, and it doesn't ever diminish. It doesn't ever slow down. It doesn't ever wear out. And doesn't have the same negative side effects as some of the earthly joys that we sometimes get caught up in. And that's why you see people in the Hasidic tradition in particular, that it's almost comical how joyful they are all the time. We make musicals about it, and we kind of do paintings about it, and it almost becomes a caricature. But if you've met some people in this community, it's quite powerful to meet someone that's just happy, basically, whenever you see them, all the time, as if I'm having a birthday party. They're that happy all the time, and wouldn't that be nice? And this is actually the pathway through which they do it. It's not just some cultural thing where you're supposed to be happy, so they're fake smiling. It's not some caricature they're putting on while you're around. This is really a profound change in how I am interpreting the world that can make a person happy constantly, despite negative or seemingly negative stuff going on in your life. So it's a very powerful, powerful stance. Any thoughts about that? Any questions about that? That's kind of the crux of this chapter here. Can I at least get a smile? Can I get a smile? Yeah, Noreen?
Well, it's a little bit off, Tom, but in this week's Parsha, they talk about joy and happiness. It says the word simcha appears 12 times in Deuteronomy, that Deuteronomy is all about joy, and that joy is shared. It has to do with sharing. It's not about individuals. You don't have joy as an individual. Either you're sharing with God or you're sharing with other people. And that's how Rabbi Sachs was pointing out, that's how they look at joy, that it lives in the moment, and it's a today kind of thing. It's very present. It was interesting because you're talking about joy, and it just stuck with me.
Absolutely, that brings it all together, and I think it drives home the point that the Alter Rebbe is not making up something new. He's just saying, this is a collection of sayings. This is a collection of teaching. This is what the Torah is all about. Look at Deuteronomy. And Rabbi Sachs, of course, is also a devotee of this system of self-refinement. So he brings that out as well, that really true joy is about being other-centered, about the divine soul. And so if I'm joyful because I'm serving others, I'm joyful because I'm making a home for the infinite. That's a joy that is true and lasts. And really the joy of the divine soul, that's the only legitimate joy that's not going to kind of fade and wither in some way. Yeah, very good. So heart will rejoice. Why? Al shezachar liot ushpizichan. I love that. Like vura pamim b'chol yom kefi ha'et v'hapnai shelo kemisat yado asher hirchiv Hashem lo. Dan?
In meriting to be a host to the Almighty through his study of Torah, which causes him to be a sanctuary for God twice each day, according to the extent of his available time and according to the capacity which God has granted him.
And it's an amazing leap. What would be the advantage if every time we sat down, we really felt in our mind and our heart, now I'm stepping up to Sinai, I'm making a home for God, I'm having that same experience that my soul had when it was blasted out of my body and couldn't endure, of total oneness with the essence of God. And even if you get wrapped into it, you know how your senses get nullified, you go into the flow, you lose sense of where you are. And there's ways for your mind and heart to really get close to that. But just knowing that's the case and the joy that would bring me, if that was my reality now, I'm sitting here at Sinai, I'm not just sitting in my home in front of a Zoom with friends learning Torah. We're all gathered together and the infinite is right here and the world is gone. It's, you feel kind of something inside, like your heart skips a beat. Even considering what that would be like. So taking time to meditate on that so that becomes more and more of my reality, that's a tremendous source of joy for us who are learning, for anyone. And of course, if I get a little more free time, what should I do with it? Go ahead, Eleanor.
If God grants him a greater abundance of time for Torah study, then he whose hands are pure will increase his effort. That is, he should resolve that as more time becomes available to him. Oh, hold on. There we go. He will devote it to Torah study. Moreover, God reckons a good intention as an actual deed.
So there's actually 2 points in this. One is, if I'm set, I got the morning and the evening, I'm doing the extent of my free time, and so I'm at my level. Now, I find a box of gold coins buried under a tree, and now suddenly I don't have to work and I have all this free time. Do I just sit back and eat, kreplach and enjoy my free time? No, now divine providence to give me more free time. So now my soul is supposed to be learning this many hours a day, and I should be responsible and recognize what the privileges of doing this and increase my Torah learning. That's the traditional view for sure. But here's a really cool piece that I think applies in our very busy world and is an inspiration to me. That is, machshava tova chulu. A good thought is considered to be an actual deed. And that's a halachic reality, actually. That is, if I'm in a room and someone faints and someone says, "Quick, bring some water," and I run and I go to get the water to help this person, that's a mitzvah. But then when I get back, someone else has already gotten there, right? Someone else did it. So I'm standing there with this water, and now I put it on the table, I drink it, whatever. There's no mitzvah, right? But if I intended to do it, even if I didn't physically manage it, if something got in the way, something prevented me, now God says, you know what? I'm going to join the thought to the deed. We learned this in an earlier chapter, and it actually connects just the same way as if I did it. And in fact, even more beautifully, because when I'm doing the mitzvah, it's me trying to make sure it's done properly. In this case, it's God actually doing the mitzvah, and God doesn't make mistakes. So God does the mitzvah more perfectly than I could do it. So there's some advantage to having these mitzvahs that God is connecting for us. And the same thing applies to if I intend to learn more Torah, but now the world gets in the way. I don't manage something, and I can't figure it out, or I don't get to it that day. If I had the intention of learning Torah with all of my free time and being at that level, then God says, you know what? Small Ash meant to do it today, so I'm gonna elevate all that Torah learning that he meant to do anyways. But you got to be sincere. This isn't like, well, you know, Facebook got in the way or something like that. This is really if life gets in the way. So it's another piece that helps us elevate even the times we're not learning Torah, because we know, well, if I had more time, I would. Now God says, okay, all that time that Small Ash isn't learning Torah, that gets elevated too, because he would have done it sincerely. Do you like that? Is that a little far-fetched? Yeah, Maxine?
It seems like they create all these laws and things for you to do, and then they spend a lot of time figuring out how to get around them.
Well, you know,
thinking.
I think if you look at the way Jews lived in history, you know, devout people for whom this was their life, this was what they were about, they must have been very upset at being poor and not having the resources to sit and learn. And I'm going with my wagon early every morning and greasing the axles and feeding the horses and going out and finding a client to feed my family. And I drive by on my way out of town, the house of study, and I see all these people sitting with God and learning, and I wish I could be there. So, you know, I think it's more in that spirit. I don't think it's so much a shortcut to get around it. I think it's a way for even the Jews, which were considered not so holy, not so knowledgeable, for the Baal Shem Tov to say, no, they're just as holy, because they would have learned Torah, and God's connecting all that time. And there's a beautiful reality to it that allows every single Jew to be just as holy as we thought even the greatest sages were. Yeah. But it is, you know, it is a quirky kind of way of looking at it. I'll give you that.
Cantor, how does the time you spend doing your prayers, morning and evening, fit into all this?
Well, technically, if you're learning Torah all the time, you're not obligated to pray. So for someone, there were people in Jewish history, great sages, who just learned all the time, and they was said they prayed whatever, once a month, once a year. They'd interrupt that Torah stage to pray because, you know, I don't know why they felt like it or that was an important day. But technically, if you're learning Torah full time, you're not obligated to pray. It actually falls below it. But for all of us who aren't learning it full time, now we're obligated to pray because you know, we're not taking away from our Torah learning by doing it.
Cantor? Many of the prayers come from the Torah.
That's true. So like we said,
Yeah.
you know, when you got a text of Mishnah or Gemara in the prayers, then that also weaves it in and you get some Torah study accomplished while you're praying. So that's also true.
Yeah.
But now we're going to go to not just elevating and making a home for God by Torah learning, but also by the physical mitzvot, which also function to connect me to the infinite and to make a home for the infinite now in the physical part of my world, and to actually elevate, as we'll see, the rest of the physicality of my domain up to that level as well. So by the end of this chapter, we're really going to say, even though I'm not at the level of a patriarch or a matriarch, I'm not at a chariot level, I have little passes, I have links to elevate myself to that level whenever I learn Torah, and to elevate my physicality and my whole surroundings also to that level by the link that mitzvahs give me and the power they have, because they are also creating a home for the Ein Sof here, impossibly in physical reality. וגם שהיום כולו שעוסק במשא ומתן יהיה מתכון לשבטו יתברך בנתינת הצדקה שייתן מגיבו. Doreen, I think, go ahead. If you want to, why don't you unmute for us?
Am I supposed to read?
Doreen.
Doreen, that's what I thought.
There
Got
you
it. Okay. Okay. Even during the remainder of the day, when he is engaged in business, he will be an abode for God by giving charity out of the proceeds of his labor.
Right, so there's a phenomenon that happened with the sacrifices at the temple that we need to understand this. What's that, Rick? Oh, it wasn't my gesture, okay. So when we had this sanctuary, we had the actual ark, and we gave sacrifices, by coming in and pouring a certain amount of wheat or wine or oil or an animal on the sacrifice, on the altar, we actually elevated that whole aspect of reality, right? Just like when I pray in the morning and say the Shema, I'm elevating the whole day, even though I only spent however many minutes saying the Shema. The same thing goes with the physical. If I take a sheep and sacrifice it on the altar, that is taking all the sheep species and all the grass that the sheep eats and all the water the sheep drinks. That whole phenomenon is being elevated by this one sacrifice because it's all connected. And the same thing applies now with charity. I may be spending a ton of my energy earning money to raise a family and have a home, and that's a good thing. But that could be a neutral thing. I may be just doing it for my own sake. But when I take a certain percentage of that and donate it to charity, now all the energy that I use to earn all that money, it's wrapped up in that act of tzedakah, of charity, the same way the whole world was elevated by that one sheep or by that handful, that fistful of flour. But we can do it with a consciousness, right? So I might be working all day thinking, give me money, or I want to get ahead, or boy, I want to be I want to be a millionaire or whatever. And that's my animal soul working, and then it's not elevated. Or I can be there saying, you know what? I'm working to be healthy, to raise a family, to support charities, to donate to the world around me. And now, when I give just 10% to charity, I'm elevating all of the energy and all of the wealth that I've earned because I'm doing it with my divine soul. My divine soul is not in it for myself. My divine soul is in it for my family and for my community. And even if I'm just one of those people that learns a chapter in the morning and a chapter in the evening, and I'm in business all day or some pursuit, I can do that with the divine soul or with the animal soul, and that makes all the difference. Yeah? So we're now moving from technical Torah study and how that creates a home for God to just bringing that mindset into day-to-day life, and now neutral reality can also become an encounter with the infinite and elevating the world and serving our purpose. Yeah, we'll go closer, deeper into it. Maxine?
Charity is one of God's attributes which we are enjoined to emulate, as our sages say, as he is compassionate, so must you be. And as it is written in Tikkun Zohar, kindness is the right arm of God.
Yeah, there's a whole other dynamic. Sorry, I missed this Hebrew. Shehi mimidotav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu ma'hu rachum b'chulu mo shekatuv b'tikunim chesed ra yamina. As I said, when we, it's another dynamic that when we emulate God and when we act charitably, we cause a reflection and a flow from the Ein Sof, and it causes chesed, loving kindness, to flow down into the world. So it's another powerful reality that not only we're making a home for God by the mitzvah, but we're bringing additional blessings into the world by being charitable. And my teacher label suggests that while giving a certain percentage, 10% is the minimum in Judaism.
Selma, I'll call you back.
By doing that, we elevate all of our wealth. That to bring the consciousness into my flow of life, it's good to do it on a regular basis. It's good to practice. So one of the things he asked me to do when we started learning was, he said, if you're going to give $100 to charity in a year, instead of doing it in one check for $100, put a quarter every day or so into a tzedakah box. So you get used to the act of putting it in, and it becomes who you are, right? You give charity. And even though it's the same amount, it might be $100 or so at the end of the year, the fact that you've done it each day, you've done it hundreds of times now, that actually creates a stronger flow chesed, of loving kindness coming down from the infinite, and it gives you a stronger connection, because it's like, I've had 100 I had 100 short conversations with someone as opposed to just checking in once a year, and it grows, of course. So that's another thing I'd suggest for anyone who's learning, if that's not your practice, is to have a visible container for charity, and whatever you normally give, just divide it up into as small parts as you can, and be in the habit at least once a day of putting something in the box. So it's not something you do kind of while you're doing your finances. You see how much you can give and you write a check, but rather it's a part of your daily life, and that brings that sense of creating a home for the infinite right into your home and right into your financial world. And even though one distributes no more than a fifth, right? And a fifth is considered the high end, right? 1 out of 10 is normal, and then 1 out of 5 is the most one should give, other than unusual circumstances. Hare hachomesh male imo kol harba yadot lashem liot machon l'shivto yibarech. And
Yet the fifth elevates within all other 4 parts to God, so that they too become an abode for him.
Yeah, so that's the dynamic. That's the same as the sacrifices in the temple would elevate the physical world. Now that 1/10 or 1/5, it elevates the rest of my financial energy also to God. So it's not about me and how much can I have. It's about, I'm responsible for this slice of the financial world and the physical world, and I'm going to use it with my divine soul to refine the world and fulfill why God sent me down here. It's not about me. Is that clear for people? And I tell you, this is something in our world, at our time, and for anyone on Facebook, I highly, highly recommend these kinds of practices, because we're really we're very financially, how do you put it? The financial side of the world is really expanded, and it just takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy. It's not like, you go to work and you get your copper coins and you put them in a bed, you buy your food and you eat it, and that's the extent of it. We've got retirement and savings and interest and investments and all this stuff. It can weigh on you. It can take a lot of space in your mind. And for that space to be all animal soul energy, it can be hard. So we want to be conscious to make that side of my life also a divine soul energy, so that I'm elevating as I go. כנודע מאמר רבותינו זיכרונם לברכה, שמצוות צדקה שכולה כנגד כל הקורבנות. And I don't know, Paul, are you able to read? Yeah, so the rest of the class, if you can read, just let us know. Let's go back to Noreen for now, in a well-known
statement, our sages have declared that the mitzvah of charity is equivalent to offering all the sacrifices.
That's it, right? We can't give the sacrifices. We don't have that. We don't have that portal to have just a totally visible, totally apparent way of making a home for the Ein Sof here in a contained way that won't blow our minds out. But when we give charity, even if I give just $1 a day or $0.25 a day, that elevates the rest of my energy, because it's equivalent to all the sacrifices. And it's like I came and I gave all the sacrifices. Spiritually, the same dynamic is happening as happened right there in the desert when we saw the pillar of fire and the miraculous things that happened around the ark. And 460, וקורבנות היה כל החי עולה לשם על ידי בהמה אחת, וכל הצומח על ידי יסרון סולר אחד בלו בשמן חולו.
Now, in the case of sacrifices, all living creatures were elevated to God through the offering of one animal. All plants through the meal offering, which consisted of merely 1/10 of a measure of fine meal mixed with oil, and so on. Similarly, all of one's earnings are elevated when he gives 1/5 to charity.
Right, so this pretty much wraps up our whole life in this. Right, so I know anytime I'm learning Torah, that's my chance to sit down and sign in with God and make a home for God like the world isn't here, in my mind and heart. And if not that, just in the morning and the evening I can do that. And if not that, now at least while I'm giving charity, that elevates my world. And that wraps up everything else with it. Any mitzvah that I do, any time I spend earning that money, even the money I'm not giving to charity, it's all elevated. And once you have your Torah learning, the mitzvahs we're doing, and the time we're spending earning money, all that's being elevated, that's pretty much my life, right? I can become just a total vessel for trying to create space for the infinite here in physicality. And that's the beauty of why in Judaism, spirituality doesn't have to leave just a normal life where you're working and you're being normally social with people and you're out and you're eating food, and you don't have to divorce yourself from the world and think you're getting closer to God, because we create a home for God right in every aspect of physical reality. And so often throughout history, these great mystical teachers in Judaism, they might be traveling around and wandering, and someone would come to town, and you might have a feeling it's a special person, but they're just eating with everybody else, learning with everybody else, talking, socializing. There's something special, but they're just normal people living a normal life. And that is the spiritual pathway. That is Jewish enlightenment. It doesn't look like somebody up on a mountain. It looks like somebody sitting down with you, having a conversation, blessing bread, putting $1 in the charity box, going to work, all that stuff. And finishing it off. Sorry, do we do top of 460? Yeah. ומלבד זה הרי בשעת התורה והתפילה עולה לשם כל מה שאכל ושתה ונהנה מארבע הידות לבריאות גופו כמו שהתבאר לקמן.
Apart from this, as is explained below, all that one has eaten and drunk and generally enjoyed for his bodily health from the other 4/5 of his earnings is elevated toward God during his Torah study and prayer.
Right, so that other however much money I had left over after I gave tzedakah, that's being elevated, and that's buying food for me and for my family, and by the way, paying for gasoline for my car to drive services in the week, let's say, and to have to go to funerals and to go visit the sick. So all that money, all that wealth that is buying the physical stuff that I'm consuming, all that physicality is actually being elevated by this process. So when you're coming home from the grocery store and you got a bag of carrots and a bag of potatoes, where do you want that lump of spiritual energy to wind up? You want it to go upwards or downwards? This is a way of making sure it all gets back up, and we're sifting through reality and we're finding all of our sparks. And maybe we can't see it now, but we're told when our soul looks back at the end of a life, we'll recognize what an opportunity it was to collect these sparks and elevate them just by living, just by eating, just by earning money with the mindset of the divine soul. And from an other-centered perspective, we know that we're creating a home for God in everything.
Okay.
Yeah? Yes, Maxine?
I'm being kind of contrary today. What about women? Does this apply to women? I know it's written way back when, but...
Is there any part of this that you would think wouldn't apply to women? Because I in my mind, this was everybody, but which part of it you wonder whether it applies to women?
I didn't know they were expected to study Torah.
So there's a difference between it applying to and it being halakhically an obligation. So that's the only difference, right? So traditional Judaism will say it's an obligation for a man to learn Torah as much as possible, and that's almost their primary obligation. They have to do it, and when they do it, there's the advantage of making a home for God. And traditional Judaism would say women are not obligated to learn Torah 24/7 like men because they're doing something even holier, which is raising a family. But they also learn Torah, of course, and when they do, they also elevate their whole world the same way men do, and that whole dynamic applies. It's not an obligation. It's an opportunity, call it. So with that one caveat, everything applies to everybody. And if, in a traditional, back in the shtetl, if a woman was able to pray in the morning when they had free time and learn for 20 minutes between all the obligations of living a traditional village kind of household life, and then pray a little bit in the evening, that had the same dynamic as a person that was in yeshiva learning 12 hours that day. And certainly their relationship with the physicality of the world, the food and the animals and the money, that applies as well. So this is something that a family does together, and it's something that a couple does together, and it's something that applies to every person, whatever gender, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and then we finished. So now the Alter Rebbe is taking us to where, even just by living a normal life, we have access to the same dynamic of bringing the essence of the infinite right into our hearts and minds and our lives, and of having the joy of knowing that's happening, and having the joy of knowing how much joy that brings to God, and that redoubles my joy, as we learned. So he's going to finish by a reality check and saying, so while you're going around knowing that you're creating a home for God and that you're at the level of a chariot just by doing these mitzvahs and learning Torah study, don't forget that you also have work to do, right? So we want to finish. He finishes with a little bit of that reality to keep us in check. והנה בכל פרטי מיני שמחות הנפש נזכרים לאל, אין מהן מניע להיות נבזה בעיניו נמאס, ולב נשבר ורוח נמוכה בשעת השמחה ממש.
All the specific types of joy enumerated above do not preclude one from being shamed and despised in his own eyes, or from having a broken heart and a humble spirit, even at the very time of his joy.
Yeah, so just because, and by the way, Maxine, it occurred to me, I was thinking about your question about men and women, and while in traditional community, you could say, well, maybe men are functioning at a higher level because they're obligated, and that's more value. But it also applies to women. I think in our community, it's almost the opposite. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't think any of us functions in the Reformed community as saying, well, I'm seriously going to live my life where if I have 10 minutes, I'm going to pick up Torah and learn it, right? We do it as part of our lives. We do it when we have time. We schedule it, and that's great. I don't think any of us really does that. So from that context, I think the men here are actually functioning at a lower level than the women here, right? Because all the men here, okay, we made time for it and we're doing it, but that's not really what the Alter Rebbe is talking about. And here I'm basically a Russia in this class, whereas the women here, you guys could be at the level of Bainani because you don't have the same halakhic obligations. So in fact, for us, I think this chapter, probably from the Alter Rebbe's perspective, the women who are here are doing this chapter better than the men that are here. It doesn't look like she followed that or like that. No?
Oh.
Should we just skip that?
No. I think we should talk about this. It's good. In traditional communities, weren't the women viewed as spiritually superior because they did not have the obligations that men had?
In many ways, a minyan is there because men don't naturally think about each other and create community. So it's a way for men to be forced to do that. And certainly, women are the closest comparison to the Ein Sof because they can create life, and men don't create life in the same way women do. So all this thing, creating life, raising Jews, instilling them the love of God, that's considered to be just automatically holy, whereas men have to kind of work up to get to close to that level. So that's very much true. But that doesn't mean that women weren't learning Torah and that didn't have the same value.
Right. But at the same time, just by virtue of the fact of them not being obligated, points to, and that's why this is all pretty much male oriented, everything we're studying, because women kind of were already there on a different level.
Yes, that's a good answer. But I think if you look at the traditional community today, people that I know and I'm seeing, women are very, very learned. They are studying this stuff. They're spending a lot of time doing it. They are teaching, and certainly from a spiritual dynamic, they're aware of this chapter and they're putting it to practice in their daily lives, and they're doing exactly this. So, you know, maybe in other centuries there was really a huge difference, but now I think there's not that same split, even though women are still much holier, obviously, than men just in their nature.
In the morning prayers, there's one segment that says where men are given
no, I don't want to go there. I don't want
a
to go
different
there.
set of mitzvos because they're wired differently than women.
There's always
right.
You're too in the know, right? But that's just divine providence, right? Look, I got a burn when I was camping. Look at that sucker. Look at that sucker, right? And what I say when I got it, hopefully I said, thank God, because this is a blessing, even though it looks like a nasty burn, right? Because whatever, we know about how a negative thing takes away a lot of Gehenna, and it's making me a better person. It's divine providence. So I thank God for the burn, the same way I thank God for making me a man, right? So it's a challenge. I have an additional challenge of being created a man, and I'm blessing God for that, like I bless God for this burn. But I don't see it as a statement that men are holier than women, personally. I know you'll find some people that feel that way, but I don't think that's what Judaism is teaching. All right, did we skim over that closely enough? Are we good? Okay, we got, let's finish this and do a quick meditation. It's good to be back. It's good to feel the give and take of the class. Sorry, do we start 461? Yeah. So we still should have something of a broken heart, even though we're full of joy that we're making a home for God. We still should know that we have work to do, that we're a little bit despised in our own eyes, the way we talked about in, the chapters before 32. For the shame. Is it Eleanor?
Rick, did you go? No, it might be me.
Okay.
For the shame and so on is prompted by one's awareness of the lowliness of his body and animal soul.
And so I remember chapter 30, 31. I remember I went through all that breaking my heart to get rid of the Timtum Halev, if you remember. And that's still there. I'm still aware of that. But that's my animal soul. That's that ego, that self-centered drive that's like that. And that can be happening at the same time as I'm doing everything else. I can still be learning Torah with my divine soul, serving God, giving charity, elevating my whole world, all the food that I eat, every check that I write, right? At the same time, I know there's this ego that's coming along for the ride that's still wants to do its thing. And I know I have a lot of work to do, and both are true. So I'm not going to get carried away thinking, look at me, I'm a chariot, right? I'm always going to keep in mind, I'm a chariot with a lot of dents. Do you know what I mean? I've got this ego that's trying to grab the reins, and I've always got to keep that in check. V'hiyoto b'simcha hu mitzad nefesh elokit, v'nitzotz elokut hamlubash ba lehachayota k'nizkar la'el b'perek lamed aleph.
While his joy is felt on account of his divine soul and the animating spark of godliness clothed within it, as mentioned above, chapter 31.
Do you shudder when you hear chapter 31? I get a little shudder. Do you shudder now that we went through it? Chills run. And you notice the Alter Rebbe actually specified which chapter. He's like, usually says as above or as we're gonna, and he just, he wants you to remember it. Here he's like, in case you forgot, it was chapter 31, right? And we were like destroying ourselves and crushing ourselves. So he's like, don't forget chapter 31 as we keep going.
We find a similar statement in the Zohar. Weeping is lodged in one side of my heart, and joy is lodged in the other.
Right, so we're complex creatures, right? This whole book started by explaining we're two souls, and so we can be appropriately upset or frustrated about my ego side, while I'm appropriately joyful as much as possible about my other centered side, which is doing all this great stuff and making a home for God effectively. right? And both can be true at the same time. So in the end, this is explaining that joy is not so much about the things the animal soul looks at and sees and wants and starts to pop up into my brain. Maybe I should get better chocolate. Maybe I should earn more money. Maybe I should get a better car. Joy is really about constantly being in that other-centered posture, and the joy that brings that I'm creating a home for the infinite by doing that, and the joy it brings to the infinite. And in that way, life is going to be less about, I'm not going to be frustrated about how life treats me. I'm going to be frustrated about how I'm treating life. Right? Something that happens, some bump that happens, I'm not going to say, oh, woe is me. It's not going to get in the way of my joy, because that's God. I'm meeting God. I got to burn. Thank God, right? It's not going to stop me from creating joy internally. It physically hurts, but it's not going to stop me from creating joy internally. What's going to cause me frustration in a healthy way is saying, oh, you know, did I snap at my kids when I burnt my hand? Did it get me off my game? Was I self-centered? Was I whiny? Whatever it was, right? In what way how did I treat life? That's the only thing that should frustrate me. Everything else should bring me joy because it's an opportunity to create a home for the infinite. And that actually, that gets us to the end of our whole section of joy, right? That was chapter 26 to 34 is joy. And now 35 to 37 is going to zoom in on this idea of making a dwelling place for God through physical mitzvot in particular. And we get into this gorgeous mashal, this idea of having oil and a fire above our heads, which I love. It's a whole systems of meditation. So we're in for a beautiful next few months learning those. But this is we reached a big destination in the Tanya, and we're actually leaving volume 1, going to volume 2. So if you're one of those people that's learning in the books, make sure you've ordered volume 2 of the Tanya. And let's finish with a revisit of the long short path. We always want to be meditating to bring this deeper into our hearts and not just keep it in our minds. So if you'll join me wherever you are, either now or if you're watching with us in the future, just find yourself in a comfortable seated position. Nice long neck. Get that 1/4 inch back in your spine. Let's slow our breath down. And even if we breathe with the intention of creating a flow of our soul, that's a way of creating a home for God in our breath. Yeah, even how we breathe. I'm not just breathing to feed my body. I'm breathing to give myself vitality for my soul to function, my divine soul. Let's start to even out our breathing into 4 counts for each stage. So breathing in for 4, 3, 2, 1. Stay there. 3, 2, 1. Let it back out. 3, 2, 1. Staying there. 3, 2. Once again. 4, 3, 2, 1. Staying there. 3, 2, 1. Back out. 3, 2, 1. Stay there. 3, 2. As you continue that pattern, notice the temperature of the air flowing over your upper lip into your nostrils. And just bring your awareness to the difference of temperature. Hot air flowing out, cooler air flowing in. If you're familiar with our technique, let's open up our wisdom gateway, space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. A beautiful gateway for wisdom to enter into our consciousness. Be full of color, full of sound, full of light. Open it up. Stay in that gateway if you're able as you breathe through this cycle. Let's place in that gateway the divine concept that we've learned. That anytime we learn Torah, we're creating a home for the infinite, just like at Sinai, just like in the sanctuary. That elevates potentially all of my mind, my heart, and even all of my physical environment. Just picture in your mind that home for the infinite that we're creating right here, living our Jewish lives at Temple Israel and in our homes. Let's continue breathing evenly. Let that divine concept refine and expand. Let the details fill your mind like wine flowing into a cup. Finally, picture the joy we bring to the Ein Sof itself. The joy that God has in seeing us creating a home for the Ein Sof and really being our best selves. You're free to remain in this meditative state for as long as you'd like. If you're watching in the future, if you're with us, please wiggle your toes and your hands, open your eyes. I remember that one day when I started the meditation, then the Zoom went down, opened my eyes, and no one was here. I still.
Answer, I could not get the minion Sunday morning. It's the first time. No matter what I did, I never got it.
Yeah, we had a mix-up, and I was scheduled to record High Holiday services, and was also put on for the Minyan. And at the last minute, we couldn't get someone. So, but this coming Sunday, I'm scheduled to be on. God willing, have the regular Facebook Live and all that.
Hey, Cindy, got a present for you. Look who's next to me.
Hi.
Oh,
Let me
She
see
loved your
the-
class today. She loved your
Put her
class.
on your lap.
Did you like the class?
Loved your class.
Was it funny ideas or was it good stuff?
It was great stuff.
Oh, adorable.
Okay.
My gosh. Okay, we're
Okay.
signing off of Facebook.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us there.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
See
so
you.
tell
at
me
the
what's
next
the
one.
tastings coming up this 15th?
Yeah.
Oh, we're
Ooh.
gonna do. Okay, I'm stopping.